Welcome. My name is Colby Kervick, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Vermont, and I'm really happy to be presenting to you today. For those of you who may have participated in a webinar earlier this spring, my colleague Katie Shepard did one that was focused on strategies for collaboration. And this presentation that I'm offering today will build on some of those ideas, but will really be focused on some research that I completed recently with Vermont parents of children with disabilities that was exploring their experiences collaborating with schools. And so the title is Constructing a Seat at the Table, Parents' Perception of Collaboration with Schools. And what that really gets at is this idea that oftentimes when we think about collaboration, and a lot of the literature that's written and the articles that people might find talk about collaboration from a professional perspective. And I was really interested in learning about how parents use strategies to foster collaborative relationships with schools and what those experiences are like. So I start you with a quote that I think really resonates with me, is that what is it that complicates this parent-professional partnership, this dance? Why do we often collide in our attempts to help our children and students reach their fullest potential? My experience talking with parents, and then in my own role as someone who prepares teachers to work with families, I find that even people with the best intentions oftentimes struggle in forming really truly equitable relationships with families, and we need to do better. So I'm going on to my next slide. Here it comes. Okay. So the objectives today is to provide you with a brief overview of the purpose and nature of the study. I'm going to summarize the themes that emerged from the stories that parents shared with me. I'm going to discuss parents' definitions of what it means to collaborate and the strategies that they've identified that have been helpful that they use to form collaborative partnerships. And then I'm also going to share with you advice that they shared with me about strategies that parents might use to help foster stronger collaboration with schools. So just a couple notes. I'm going to be happy to answer questions, but it might be helpful to address those questions at the end. And then the other piece is that when I talk about parents and use that term throughout the presentation, what I'm referring to are the parents who participated in the studies. So it's not meant to generalize to the experiences of all parents, but just this is information that was shared for me from the people who I was able to talk to. I'll start with just a little bit of background around what motivated this study. So when we think about the system of special education in the United States, the original law, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, was passed in 1975. And it was really parent advocacy and their legal action that led to passage of the legislation. And that law guaranteed all children with disabilities the right to a free, appropriate public education. And so when that law got passed, there was really a framework that was created that has since sort of withheld the test of time over the last 30, 40 years. That's led to sort of what is outlined in the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA, with the most recent authorization being in 2004. And one of the core principles in the law is that parents participate in the process, and that includes not only the right to review records, but the ability to provide informed consent and to participate in decision-making. And states are really responsible for establishing their own regulations to ensure that that core principle is being upheld. One of the things that I find is interesting that if you look at the Vermont context, there was a survey. Every year the state has to conduct surveys with parents about their experiences with many facets of implementation of the special ed system. And one of the things that they serve parents around is around their rate of satisfaction with participation in IEP processes. And in 2011, what the Vermont survey results showed that 34% of the respondents, so these were the people who replied to the survey, felt satisfied with their level of participation. So that really raised a question for me around why do almost 2/3 of the people who responded not feel satisfied with their rate of participation. And I think one of the things that's interesting, and Katie referred to this in the webinar in March, is that even though parent participation is required by the law, the regulations don't really say what the structure of that participation should be. And so over over the years, it's been assumed that it's collaborative teaming, and that's how we've interpreted the structure of how parents and professionals might work together. But there's no real guidance around what the nature of that collaboration is, and I think that sometimes teams really struggle with the piece around in collaborative teams, there's supposed to be this sense of equity and parity among team members, and I think that many parents experience a sense of inequity in their experiences working with schools. So I also, prior to starting the study, looked a little bit at some of the research literature and articles that are out there about collaboration. And one of the things that we find is that prior to the passage of the law in 1975, there's a lot written about parents in their role of advocacy that led to the passage of the law. After the law was passed, what's interesting is that, leading up to the law, parents were really in the driver's seat. And then the law passes, and then the responsibility for implementation really put a lot of power in the hands of professionals. And so as a result, the degree to which parents were really prominent members of those teams started to vary. So right after the law passed, there was a lot written that looked at sort of rates of satisfaction in terms of participation. But it wasn't really until the 1990s, until current, that this idea that parents are really partners in the process started to get established. And so there is sort of a shift that it's not just about participation, but really what we should be working towards is a collaborative partnership with families. And as a result, that has generated lots of how-to articles, or what I call how-to articles. So in my work at the university, I'm training future teachers. And so if you look at some of the journals that we might share, or in preparing teachers, there's a lot of training around how to be a collaborative partner with families, ways teachers can foster more parent engagement. Well, all of these how-to articles are really written from the lens of professionals and are really oriented towards a professional audience. There hasn't been a significant amount written that's really looking at collaboration through the lens of parents and really honoring and identifying the varied strategies that parents use to try to establish collaborative relationships. So my interest in doing this research was to really go back to not focusing on the professional perspective at this juncture, but really understanding from parents what their experiences with the collaborative relationships has been. So my purpose was really to get at that and listen to the stories of parents and try to understand better that experience. The primary research question was, how do Vermont parents construct an understanding of collaboration with schools through their experiences raising a child with a disability? And then related to that, understanding more parents' experiences navigating and negotiating special ed processes, how they describe their involvement on collaborative teams, and trying to understand the degree to which parents are perceiving their knowledge about their children. How is that valued or received in the context of those collaborative team meetings? So I'm going to give you a little bit of details about how the study was structured, but then what I'm really going to do is unpack for you the themes that emerged, and I'm going to share with you direct quotes from parents about their experiences and the ideas that they conveyed through this study. So just to give you a little bit of sense, I interviewed 12 participants, and it was an open sort of call for people who would be interested in talking to me. And so parents nominated themselves for participation in the study. And I really looked to try to capture a variety of perspectives, both from an ethnicity perspective, education level, different rates of satisfaction with the schooling experience. And what I found is that actually most parents in the study, even if they identify themselves as being fairly satisfied with their experience collaborating with schools, their stories were about bumpy times, and it was more so like a little bit of a roller coaster ride across the years. I looked to get the perspectives of parents who had children who fell into different types of disability categories, parents of kids of different ages, and then also I looked to have some geographic distribution. It was important to me not to just get, the story of one particular school district, but have a broader understanding of how different parents were experiencing this across the state of Vermont. And so the parents that I interviewed, which you're seeing here in this box, spanned 9 different school districts, and within those school districts, 22 different school experiences. The names that you see are pseudonyms that either the parent self-selected or names that I assigned. Most of them selected their own pseudonyms, though. And you'll see also the current age of the child ranged from a parent who had a child in preschool through a parent who had a child who was currently in college. The range of disability types also varied across a variety of different disability categories. The other thing that I'll note is that a lot of the studies that have happened around parents' experiences collaborating with schools has focused on the perspectives of mothers. And so I really intentionally, I have 2 dads that were in the mix, and I really wanted to get sort of the perspective of some fathers as well. So when we think about research, oftentimes people assume that research is that there's a hypothesis that's being tested and you're sort of trying to get affirmation that that hypothesis is correct or incorrect. I was doing qualitative research, and the purpose of qualitative research is not so much to test a hypothesis or a theory, but it's to really understand the experiences of a group of people and to understand sort of the how and why people have had certain types of experiences in their lives. And so in conducting this research study, I didn't go in with a set of assumptions or theories. The purpose was to gather the stories that parents had and then to look at those interview transcripts and really try to make meaning of that. And so I interviewed each parent individually, and the interviews lasted between 45 minutes and 2 hours. And then once I'd completed all the interviews, I shared those interview transcripts back with the parents so that they could affirm that what was said was what they wanted to be included in the study. And then afterwards, what I did is I used a process of really reading through all of those interviews and trying to identify areas of commonality and intersectionality. So where are some ideas that were similar across what parents shared, and then also what were some of the unique perspectives that parents brought to try to capture sort of the range of different ideas and experiences that they had had with collaboration with schools. After I had gone through that process, some themes started to emerge from that data that was shared with me through the interview process. And so I invited all of the participants to participate in a focus group. And 5 of the 12 participants participated in the focus group. And we started to explore some of the themes in more depth. And so then I was also including what part of what you'll see when I share the data is that parents added some additional ideas through that experience of talking together in the focus group. So that was the process in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer questions if you want more nitty-gritty on that. But what I find is probably most interesting is what parents talked about, and so we'll jump to that. So there were 5 themes that emerged. The first was focused around the experience of diagnosis and what that looked like and how that differed for each family has a very unique and individual experience with diagnosis. The second was called Knowing My Child, and that really started to unpack what it is, what does it mean to be an expert on your child? What is parent knowledge and what is professional knowledge? Where do they intersect and how are they unique? The third one, Constructing a Seat at the Table, really looked at how the parents I interviewed defined collaboration and what strategies they used to foster collaboration with professionals in their lives. The fourth acknowledged the many roadblocks that parents had encountered along the way, where collaboration broke down and where they felt there was tensions in the process, both from the school system as well as from individuals that they were working with around planning programs for their children. And then the last one was sort of a visioning theme that had parents envision, the perfect meeting and how they would like to see the system shift to foster create more opportunities to really achieve that ideal of collaboration with schools. So I'm going to go into each of these themes, and what I'll do is I'll share a little bit of like the big ideas that emerged, but then I'm going to back that up with direct quotes from participants so that you get a flavor of what they were sharing with me. And that's sort of how qualitative research works. A lot of the writing of the findings is not so much numbers and charts and graphs, it's storytelling. And so I'm going to attempt to tell a snippet of the stories that emerged. My dissertation study is lengthy, and I'm happy to send it out as an email link to anyone who's interested afterwards if you want to delve into it, because I probably won't do justice to all of the different ideas that emerged today because of our time frame. So that first theme, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that I think there's a lot of assumptions out there that diagnosing a disability is sort of like this medical diagnosis and that it's a one-time event. And through my conversations with parents, one of the things that I learned and was thinking a lot about was that parents really described diagnosis as being not a singular event, but something that was more of a process that emerged over time, and that even if it was like a moment, there was one parent whose child was diagnosed with a disability at birth, but what they came to learn about their child expanded over time, diagnoses changed, and that diagnosis is also really contextual. So you may receive a diagnosis when your child is young, and that same diagnosis may change to a new term, or be defined differently when they're in different contexts. So when a child transitions from preschool to kindergarten, that whole process of diagnosis might happen again. And so really understanding that, number one, it's not a singular event, and number two, I think that there is some thought that, like, oh, professionals are the ones doing the diagnosing, and that was not the experience for 50% of the parents that I talked to. They were really in the driver's seat through their own advocacy and their knowledge of their children and the networking that they were able to do. They were the ones that were helping the professionals understand what the disability was and to begin that process of diagnosis. And so I think that one of the things that we can do better as professionals in terms of honoring the knowledge that parents have is realize that we're not often the ones who are in the driver's seat of that early experience of discovering that your child has a disability, that oftentimes parents are in the driver's seat and have the most knowledge about that. And then the other piece is really honoring the fact that during different times of transitions, parents have to revisit that diagnosis or label that's given to their child, and whereas teams change all the time, parents are the ones who are consistently moving with that child through the different contexts and different service providers, and so they really have the historical knowledge that's really vital. So again, back to this idea of who's doing the diagnosis and what the process looks like, I'm going to highlight two parents in this section. The first is a dad, Will, and so his daughter was diagnosed with a very rare genetic disorder, and it was a very long process of trying to discover what actually was going on, and none of the professionals that they were working with locally really were able to pinpoint it. And it was really his wife and he who were able to discover what was going on, and they did through YouTube. And so one of the other ideas that came out of my work in this study was that parents have lots of access to information and resources, and so understanding that that also is really important information that they bring to the table. So this was Will's experience. He said, so I'm asleep, it's probably like 1 or 2 in the morning, and my wife comes running upstairs and says, you need to come look at this video. And I say to her, I'm not looking at another kid have a seizure online. I'm done looking at these videos of kids. I don't want to watch. And she said, this is the last time I'll ask you. You need to see this. And I went downstairs, and there was a girl online having an episode. And at this point, he became emotional. I haven't told the story in a long time, just like her. I mean, it was a spitting image, and we had no idea what it was until that point. And it was like, that's her. That's what's happening. And so the next day, we called the neurologist, and he said, yeah, this could be it. And it turns out that it was it. And I'm not going to identify what the disability is because it is so rare it would identify this parent. But what he talked about from that point on is that they have really been the experts on things related to their child because there's not a lot of local professional knowledge about this particular disability, and so they're really linked into a national advocacy organization and research group that is learning more about it. And so they really, she's now in preschool and will be transitioning to kindergarten soon. They become sort of the experts around what her disability is and really letting all of the professionals know and providing them with the most up-to-date information. Lindsay had a very different experience with diagnosis. So her child had had, in her mind, a very non-eventful early childhood preschool experience, and when he started kindergarten, things really started to unravel, and he was having lots of behavioral challenges. He was having a hard time sustaining through a day. He was being sent to the office, and it became this very, very horrendous kindergarten year. And she started meeting with the school and asking for help and trying to see what was going on, and was really getting a lot of vague responses from school professionals. No one was really taking the lead on meeting with her other than the classroom teacher. She started to ask about referral processes, and the school was less than forthcoming about what that process could look like. They didn't talk about EST, and so they ended up pulling their child from school and homeschooling him for the remainder of the year and for most of his first grade year. And during that time, they went directly to the Stern Center themselves and received a diagnosis. And so I'm just going to unpack EST as the Educational Support Team meeting, and that's sort of oftentimes the first step where if a child's having a hard time in schools, it's a team of teachers and other school professionals, which might include a special educator, who can meet to problem solve around that. And so her experience was that even though they ended up having one of those meetings, no one was really guiding what the next steps were. There was a lot of admiring of the problem. He's having a hard time, yes, well, we're not really quite sure what to do, and people weren't being very clear about other ways that she could get help and support and strategies that could support him. So in the process of homeschooling him for a year and going to the Stern Center, they ended up with a diagnosis that he has Asperger's. And she brought that back to the school, and even that, you know, no one was explaining to her that just because she had this diagnosis, they still had to go through a formal school process to determine special education eligibility. And so she talked about the frustration of not having transparency and clarity around the process, and sitting in a room with professionals who all seem to know what's going on, and as the parent being really new to the process, not having a clue how to navigate that. So what she communicated was, to this day, what remains my biggest frustration about it is it feels like you're going to a country where everyone knows the rules and everyone knows the language and everyone knows the secret handshakes, and they don't tell you anything about it. And so her, you know, a lot of her focus during our interview was around schools doing a better job being a lot more transparent about interpreting the process outside of the structure of the formal meeting, so that parents can feel like they're not at a disadvantage right from the get-go. She always felt like she was trying to play catch-up, and that was really, really frustrating for her. The second theme, Knowing My Child, as I mentioned before, really looked at what is it that makes parent knowledge so unique, and what is that cliche, parents are the expert? What does that really mean? And because parents that I interviewed, almost all of them referred to themselves as the expert on their child, and they said, you know, I really need professionals to know that. So it was important to unpack what that means, because I think even sometimes professionals give lip service to that. They'll say, oh, well, we know the parent's the expert. But why is that? What is that knowledge that parents bring to the table that is vitally important, that's unique, and that's different than what professionals might know about the child? So I wanted to be able to unpack that so that we can be more genuine when we say that, yes, parents really are the experts on their children. So one of the things that came out was this idea that parents who have children with disabilities adopt a lot of different roles through the process of raising their child. So they become case managers on their children. They become interventionists. They become experts through that process of working with such a range of professionals, helping their child across settings, not just in school, becoming good consumers of information and research to be able to better inform the team about their child's needs. That acknowledgement of the multiple roles, I think, is really significant. Parents, when they come to a collaborative team meeting with a special education team, are not just there as the parent. They're there wearing all of those hats. And perhaps if people had a deeper sense of what that parent role entailed, then there could be more equity in those meeting contexts. The other piece is that parents communicated to me that they have very high expectations for professionals. And so when collaboration was really working well, it's when they felt like the program quality was really top-notch, that the professionals knew how to do their job, knew the procedures, and were clear and transparent about that, and that they were really using what a lot of parents were talking about were cutting-edge interventions. Like I mentioned before with Will going to YouTube to sort of diagnose his daughter, he said, look, I'm hearing about all of these new tools and instructional programs and strategies that can be used with children who have similar challenges as my daughter. And then I go into the team meeting and they say, well, this is what we do for speech-language pathology. And he said, I want to know that the professionals that are working with my child are also staying up on research and are exploring new tools and are open to new ideas. And several parents echoed that sentiment, the idea that they didn't expect that the professionals knew all the answers, but that they were willing to do the research and do the investigation and connect families with knowledge or expertise that they may not have as a school, but would be helpful for their children. So that was really, really important. And I think that it's important for professionals to really understand that. And then the third piece of this was that the way information was shared across the team really impacted parents' perspectives on whether it was a good collaborative teaming experience or not. Part of that information sharing included validating that the information that parents brought to the table was really valid and important and honored and received. But parents also felt like when professionals shared information and resources that could be beneficial to them at home, that was really helpful and really welcomed and made them feel more like equitable members of the team, that if they could share something with the teachers that was well received and the teachers shared something with them, that really established that sense of parity on the team. They also identified, communication is key, and I know that Katie talked about that in the March webinar, but really establishing forms of communication that will work for that family and understanding that that could be individualized across lots of different families. So for some families, a journal may work. For other families, they may want email. Another family might want communication. But being really explicit about setting that up early on is really important. And then really the idea that information helps to having access to information, whether it's about the process or about the types of programming that you're using, really establishes equity. So I'm going to give you a couple quotes, and then I'm going to show you a visual model that unpacks this a little bit more. So Bethany really talked a lot about this idea that parents are case managers, and her child has multiple disabilities, and she said, I kept hearing that everyone was my son's case manager, but everyone was case manager in their own realm, and so there were 6 or 7 of them, and I was ultimately the case manager who connected all of those hubs. And many of the parents I spoke to echoed that sentiment, that they're working not just with schools. School is just one small aspect of all the different kinds of professionals that they were working with around meeting their needs of their child. And each of those agencies or medical professions or social workers or the school had people designated as case managers. And they all thought that they were sort of running the programs. And she said, really? None of them were. I was helping them all stay coordinated with each other. So really, I'm the case manager, and it was helpful when teams could sort of acknowledge and honor that I had that role. And so one of the things that I did, and this is a little bit tricky to see, but I think partly why parents are the case managers and parents are the experts is that they are doing lots of different tasks simultaneously in order to achieve the best outcome for their child as possible. And a lot of the literature that's been written about parents in their relationships to collaborative teams with schools talks about the process being a developmental process where parents become aware that their child has a disability, and then they start participating in teaming experiences with schools, and gradually they get more information, and through that process they become more able to be an equal partner because they gain more information, and it's seen as sort of a linear process. And when I was talking to parents, I was really struck that it wasn't linear for them at all, that their composition of their teams sometimes changed every year. So they were the consistent member. It's not that they were having to adjust to a new team. They were constantly navigating new professionals coming on board that had differing levels of expertise themselves. And so they were very much in a cycle of gathering information, filtering information, sharing information, advocating for their child. This led to more networking with other people and other agencies, and that through all that process, parents were very much demonstrating leadership from the get-go. And so I really believe it's more of a dynamic model, and what parents were communicating is that we're doing all of these things at once, and it's not just that we get information and then we become leaders or we become better advocates. It's changing all the time, and the context is changing all the time, so we have to constantly be on our game in terms of really being able to respond to those different contexts. And that's what makes our knowledge, that historical knowledge as we navigate through the different teams with our children, really, really vital and important. So I'm going to share for you a quote. It's long, so it's not on the slide, so you're just going to have to hear it auditorily. But it was this one parent that I spoke to, Andrew, he was very metaphorical as he shared his experiences, and his fire truck metaphor was particularly poignant, so I'll share that with you. He was talking about sort of his expectations for professionals and the sense of urgency that he felt like professionals should have when it comes to program planning for his son. It's like calling the fire department. You expect a truck to come, and you expect them to have the right equipment and the right firefighters, the right skills, and they're going to help you. And when they don't show up and they don't put out the fire, you get your hands full. And so I think, as human servants, they need to be firefighters and rescue people. They need to drive the ambulance and the fire truck, and they've got to feel that they're wearing the bunker gear and have a helmet and carrying a kit bag, and they're going to have the answers. And even if it may seem rough in the field, it's care. It's not arbitrary. This is what I do for a living, and you need to trust me to take control of the situation, and I'm going to get you to the hospital okay, and I'm going to put the fire out in your house, and you're going to be fine, because that's what parents want. That's what parents need. It feeds their hope. I like to go home, go to bed, and close my eyes and go to sleep and know that somebody has actually got my back. So the sentiment that he was expressing was that he clarified that afterwards. He said, look, I don't expect the professionals on my son's team that they're going to know all the answers, but I want them to be honest to me when they don't, and I want them to have a plan for how we're going to get those answers. He said, I oftentimes felt like I would go to meetings, and he called it what he deemed cafeteria-style education. He said, we would sit and talk about my son, and then they would say, well, this is what's for lunch, so this is what he's getting. And he said, well, shepherd's pie might not meet his needs. And they would say, well, this is what we can do. And he said, I honestly felt like it's because they weren't quite sure what to do, so they tried to sort of fit him into the mold of what they were familiar with. And he said, I really needed them to acknowledge that fitting him into that box wasn't working, and even if they didn't have the answers, to acknowledge that, and then to have that sense of urgency to say, look, we've got you covered, we've got your back, we're working with your family, and we will collectively come up with the answer to find what will meet your child's needs. And then Maggie talked a lot about this idea that gets back to the almost a sense that parents are case manager, or parents are adopting multiple roles in their child's lives. She said the parent is a juggler, although they interact and overlap, but I feel like the parent is the one who has all the balls, the one touching all of them. There's mental health, emotional health, education, there's social life, the family interactions, and just at home life and how things go there. This is part of the whole picture of your child's life. She was really trying to say that school is just one aspect of everything that the parent is contending with. And so sometimes the school, her feeling in team meetings was that the school felt like the issues that they needed to address were the most important, but she had to weigh that in the broader context. And so really being open to parents being able to share whether something's a priority or not is important because, again, they've got the bigger picture, and so all of that has to be considered in making those educational decisions. So the third theme, constructing a seat at the table, like I mentioned, was how parents that I interviewed were defining collaboration and the different strategies that they used to form and establish collaborative teams with the schools and different professionals they were working with. So I'm going to unpack these. The first part of their definitions of collaboration was open communication. And it sounds cliche, but they said that it was really important that the best collaborative experiences they had were then when everyone's perspective was welcomed at the table, even if ideas were different. And they said really emphatically that I actually like it when people disagree on the team, that the school just doesn't have a united front, because that shows me that they're really thinking about my child. And when we have differing opinions, at least then we can sort of move forward and have creative solutions to things. But if ideas aren't all welcomed, then we're missing out on opportunities for someone who might actually have the strategy that will work or an approach that we hadn't considered before. Another part of their definition of collaboration was a real commitment to the child, that it had to be evident in the collaborative process so that the decision-making process that the school and the team was using was really based on what the child needed, not versus other factors. One of the parents that I interviewed had situations where she was working with different funding agencies across districts because her child was living in one district but attending an independent school in another, and there would be fights over the table at the meetings between the different professionals because they had personal biases about the program that her child was attending. But the data showed that he was actually being successful for the first time in his life when he was 16. And she said, can we let go of these other factors and personal conflicts that you might have with each other and just focus on the fact that my child is being successful for the first time. We should be celebrating that and not letting those other factors impact the decisions that we're making. And then there was this theme around equal participation, that it's not just about inviting everyone's perspective, but conveying a tone that parent knowledge is valued and is considered in the decision-making process, and that being very important. So what parents shared was that these three ideas really make up their definitions of what a good collaborative teaming experience is, and that if one of those is missing, that it doesn't really feel like a collaborative process. So Lena said, collaboration is everybody working together. We have differences naturally, but we have to work over those differences and just make the client's life better. Just like work in the hospital, everybody's different. You don't have to agree with somebody all the time, but we have to work together as a team to provide the best services. Lena's professional background is as a nurse, and so she had a lot of parallels to her experiences nursing and how things are shifting in the medical field in terms of really family-centered and client-centered practice, and her experiences working on her child's school team. Kelly said, I appreciate it when there's discussion that might feel a little bit like disagreeing, but really is contributing something new in addition to what somebody else has already presented. So for me, true collaboration happens where there's such a level of trust with each other and comfort that you can have those discussions and not have to worry about offending or stepping on toes that get in the way of it. And when Kelly was talking, she said, you know, sometimes I do disagree with the team, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I am going to block decisions going forward. I just want to be able to offer the other perspective, and I want to know that they're not going to feel defensive when I offer those perspectives. I just want to make sure that all the ideas come out. So, parent strategies. So a lot of parents were trying to find ways to initiate meetings formally or informally outside the structure of the IEP. One of the really powerful consistent threads throughout all the interviews was that IEP meetings are really limited due to the structure of them and the timing that you have at the meeting, and that when collaboration with teams is going really well, it's because there are other opportunities to have conversations about the kid outside the formality of the IEP meeting. And so these might be meetings not about IEP team decisions, but just sharing of other information that's going on in the child's life or happening in school. And parents who were able to initiate having more opportunities to have conversations with team members felt like their collaboration with the team within the context of the IEP strengthened. And so one of the parents would do this by finding times to informally be in the school and being present. She said, you know, she's in nursing school and she doesn't have a lot of time, but when she can just breeze through the hallway or pop in and say hello, or occasionally go on a field trip to be a chaperone, she said just having a presence in whatever way I can has helped me establish stronger collaborative relationships with the team. And they also know that I'm sort of involved and engaged, even if it's not on a weekly basis. She's like, I just find ways to informally show them that I'm around and that I'm watching and listening. Communication systems were really key, and really finding what communication system worked well for you as a family, and then ways families found that they oftentimes had to adjust because sometimes they had team members, professionals who were better at communicating one way or another. And so they would be really honest and upfront at the beginning of the school year about finding also from that professional's perspective, how do they do communication with parents, and one of the times that they could reach them, and really trying to establish those from the get-go. And then taking initiative on sharing important information with team members. A couple parents said, look, I know that professionals are really busy and they may not think to ask. And so if I know something's going on that's important that needs to get out to the team member, I'm going to take the initiative about making sure that I find ways to get that information out to all team members. Because I recognize that it might just be an innocent oversight, or it might just be that they're, you know, that I communicated something to one team member, but it didn't get to all team members. And so if there's really important information that needs to be shared, not being afraid to be the one to say, like, I'm going to get that information out to people. And then this is sort of a unique one in that if you read a lot about collaboration, it's not often talked about, and this is the idea of emotion. And I think that for those of you who might have tuned into Katie's webinar, she started to talk about the fact that emotion is a very real part of the process, and whenever you're talking about your child, it generates an emotional response, and that can manifest in a variety of ways. And so I explored that with parents because several parents started to bring it up. And so I asked them to talk to me more about emotion and how their own emotional response in collaborative settings or in team meetings, what that was about and how that was a strategy for collaboration. And parents talked about it in 3 very different ways. A few parents really talked about the fact that sometimes they had to adopt a more strong emotional posture, whether that be anger or other showing frustration, or just being a little bit more, in their minds, aggressive in terms of adopting a very strong advocacy posture when they felt like the team was getting really stagnant and wasn't really moving forward and wasn't moving in the right direction for their child to get their needs met. And so that was a very conscious decision on their part, and the parents who shared the experiences with becoming strong advocates said that it's not something that they necessarily did all of the time, but there were times that as their role as the parent, sometimes they had to use that emotion and that strong advocacy to really help the team move forward, or to not neglect something that was really vital for their child. Second to that, many parents expressed the fact that because it's such an emotional process, there were times that they had to disengage from attending meetings or being in direct communication with schools as a way to regroup, to self-regulate, and also sort of for mental health and self-preservation. And it was interesting because they acknowledged that perhaps professionals might have interpreted those times as being lack of interest, but it wasn't about lack of interest. It was really about understanding that it is very emotional and that there are times that they just can't be in the heat of the moment of attending meetings and that there's other things that they have to attend to in their lives. And so making a very conscious decision to disengage from the process for periods of time in order to rebuild those emotional stores to be able to be an equitable team member at later dates. So that was pretty powerful for several parents. And then the third way that parents acknowledge the use of emotion specifically as a strategy in collaboration was the idea that one of the things that they felt like they could bring to the table that was really valuable was this idea of introducing compassion into what is sort of a formal structured process. If the only meetings that you ever have with schools are in the context of evaluations and IEPs, they can be very rigid and they can be very procedural in nature. And parents identified that because the process can feel so non-welcoming, that part of their job was to infuse humanity, and that if they got emotional and cried or brought in humor or brought in pictures, that tuning into that emotional side reminded everyone that this is a child we're talking about and that that compassion oftentimes could help teams let go some of the more formal things and get down to really what they were hoping the heart of the discussion would be, which is what's best for the child. And so then a lot of parents talked about the fact that they have to manage relationships and that you know, I think that sometimes there's these assumptions that professionals have to manage parents and like, oh, I might have a tough parent coming onto my caseload, which is like filled with like sometimes inaccurate assumptions about who that parent is and why they might be perceived or stereotyped that way. But a lot of the parents talked about we have to manage some pretty tough relationships with professionals who are not always professional with each other or with us. And so we use a lot of strategies like customer service strategies to try to diffuse escalated professionals and to manage those personalities. And I think that it's really important that professionals understand that parents are having to manage their nuances just as much as they might be perceiving that they're managing the nuances of their relationships with parents. And then also, they couldn't emphasize enough the importance of networking for information and support, finding other parents who have navigated the system, finding information that can help you in advocating for certain services or programs for your child, really finding emotional support through connecting with other parents or finding friends who have professional expertise that can help you make heads or tails of the process. And just as a personal aside, my role in the university, I do not have a child with a disability, although I do have a child who has been, who we've navigated the EST process for with a number of years. But because of my role, I have a number of friends who have children with disabilities who have gone to me and asked for information. What can I expect? We're going through an evaluation. And so informally, that's been really helpful with interpreting the process and figuring out what those secret handshakes are that Lindsay referenced. So they really emphasize the importance of networking. So I'm going to give you some quotes here that really unpack this idea of emotion because I think it might be interesting. So Katie talked a lot of times about being a really strong advocate and other times that she wasn't. And she said, as a mother, you have to decide, I know the system's understaffed and they're underpaid, and so am I going to be nice and be accepting of that, or am I going to be like a witch and make sure you take care of my child because I know that the squeaky wheel gets the grease? And she talked a lot about conscious decisions of when she was going to adopt that posture and times when she felt like it wasn't in her child's best interest to be such a strong advocate. Lindsay talked about, the emotional journey of coming to a diagnosis for her child, and when things finally stabilized and he was back in public school and things seemed to be working, she said, look, let's have a meeting when we really need to have one. Otherwise, I'm kind of operating under the that sense that no news is good news, kind of. I just need, and I think my husband needed the same, we just kind of needed a break from how intense that was. And we fully expect that intensity will come back at some point with him getting older and social interactions becoming more and more complex. And so we're kind of like, let's just enjoy this somewhat stable time for what it is. We have faith in his teacher, we have faith in his team, we love the school, we're happy. Let's just enjoy this until it all blows up in our faces again, basically. And hope that it doesn't, but fully expect at some point we're going to get another curveball. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're kind of stepping back, basically. So it's sort of unfortunate that she's anticipating that she's going to get another curveball, but most of the parents I talked to had up and down experiences, and so she was really feeling like she needed to, she said, I haven't even read the IEP this year because things are okay, and I just needed to separate the emotional energy going into the process for a while and just sort of focus my attention on other things in our family. And I'm just going to try to advance it here. Okay. And then emotion and compassion. Andrew said, I find myself introducing compassion, empathy for the child, needs, strengths, and his tendencies. So I try as best I can to describe my son and what I think his needs are from my perspective as his dad. Lulu captured this as saying, making them remember that my kid is a kid. So I'm going to read you a quick poetic transcription that will sum up this idea of collaboration. So poetic transcription is a technique that you can use during qualitative research that has you take what parents, or in this case parents, were sharing and then organizing their words into poetry. So none of these words are my words, but these captures what collectively the 12 parents I interviewed, what they envisioned collaboration being. Collaboration is everyone working together for the same purpose to improve the life of a child. Collaboration is sharing knowledge and ideas, showing professional understanding of things you know and don't know, understanding that parents know best. Collaboration is communication back and forth, not worrying about offending or stepping on toes, mutual respect. Collaboration is different ideas and different perspectives. You don't have to agree. Just make the kid's life better. Collaboration is everybody has a stake in the game. Everyone plays a part. Flex a little, give some, and compromise. Collaboration is you give, you give more, you get more, perpetual awesomeness. Collaboration is we all bring something to the table, true discussion, such a level of trust. Collaboration is the art. We keep fighting for it. That elusive collaboration. Okay, theme 4, encountering barriers. I'm not going to spend as much time on this because I know we're getting short on time and I want to leave time for questions. But there were 4 things that people brought up as being significant barriers. 1, there's just not enough time. Having an IEP meeting for 30, 40 minutes once a year is not at all sufficient to address what needs to be addressed and to form good collaborative relationships. And so somehow as a system, we need to start looking at this idea of time and figuring out mechanisms for people to have conversations and build those teaming relationships outside of those maybe formal meeting times. Money was another one. Parents identified, and you'll hear a quote in a minute, about not feeling like that's the driver in the room, that we're really doing what's best for kids and not letting budgets necessarily be clouding those decisions. Managing difficult personalities I've touched on, but that was definitely hard. One parent talked about there was 40 emails just trying to schedule a time to meet, and she felt like there needed to be better systems for navigating difficult personalities and having more collaboration among the professionals even. And then the language and structures of the process. Parents are really feeling like even when they have good connections, that it's really hard to understand how to navigate the process, understand who the point person is, know what their rights are, and it's not just about being handed the parental rights. Jane said, and then even though it's never discussed directly in the meetings, over the years, just over and over again, I just know that what's driving a lot of their points is money. And even if that's the case, it frustrates me to think that. It frustrates me to think that if there's a legitimate need that my son has, that we can't figure out a way to make that work just because there isn't money. I don't like that door being shut in my face. Lindsay said, it has a process, and so you have to know what the process is and not be handed the special ed handout that is absolute nonsense that you get at every meeting that tells you really who sits down and reads that. I mean, it's really someone who can translate the process and make it easy to understand and make you be able to think through like, okay, I get it. I can go on to step 2, and this is what we need to do. It's just made so much harder than it needs to be, and you lose time. To me, that's a real problem. You just waste and lose time that you really need. So the last theme is imagining collaborative practice, and this is where they envisioned the perfect meeting and provided advice not only for other parents, but advice for professionals. So designing a better meeting. These are some of the considerations. Who needs to be there? That's going to be really individual based on that team, that child, and that parent. So some parents express that they like everyone to be there. So that could be a team of 20, and being all there is important. Other parents said it's too many people. We need to break down those meetings and have core teams and then have information communicated out to the broader team. So you can't assume, professionals can't assume that it needs to be one way. That should be part of the conversation with parents about who are those really critical people to be at the meetings and letting them have input around that. Where it should be varied across parents as well. Some parents really preferred it to be at school because they said, this is the time that I get to see my kid's classroom and get to be in the school building, so that's really important to me. Other parents said it felt like there was a power dynamic. When the meetings are at school, it's not neutral territory. So are there ways to have the meeting in a different location that is neutral for all the players? One parent's experience, she said that she has this amazing collaborative team, and their big meetings annually happen in the pediatrician's office, and all the school personnel come and all of the related service providers, everyone's there, and she said it's great because it's not school, it's not home, but we're sort of there, and it's a very positive experience. Another parent said if he could have his wish, it might be in a restaurant or someplace where people could unwind and relax a little bit. And then other parents said they really preferred it to be at home. There was, in particular, a couple parents of kids with multiple disabilities who said, I really need the team to see the child in the context of home, and there's a lot of medical things related to my kid that it's better if we can address this in the home setting. So talking to parents about where they prefer the meeting to be. And then what should be the focus? There was a real emphasis on wanting those meetings to be strengths-based, really wanting to hear about what's going well, to have an ethic of problem solving, not admiring problems. They said that there was nothing more frustrating than hearing about everything that was going wrong and having no tools or mechanisms for the team to move through that and get to a problem-solving stage. And the other piece is that really focusing on data. Most of the parents that I interviewed really said that they appreciated actually having data that shows that the child's achieving the IEP goal, and how frustrating it was to see that their child has had the same goal for 4 years and everyone says, oh yeah, they're making progress, but they have no data to back that up. And they really advised parents to not be afraid to ask for the data. Show me the evidence that this is working, because if it's not, then we might need to make a change. And then really, the best meetings were the ones that were structured, that had agendas, that had time limits, that had a focus or a purpose. They felt like that was, and really embedded clear opportunities for all voices to be heard. So advice for parents, they wanted to share that it's really important to know your rights and to know the system. And if you aren't getting that information from the school-based staff that you're working with, then you need to find through other places, like through the Vermont Family Network or through friends or colleagues or referrals to people who can help you know that, because part of feeling like you have an equitable place at the table is knowing what your rights are and knowing how to navigate and what to expect in those meetings. Parents also said to ask lots of questions. To sometimes that's a really good strategy when you're really unhappy with something, rather than going in and adopting a posture that is being really, identifying that up front. One parent said that sometimes if she just came in and said that she was really frustrated with something, they automatically got defensive, and then that became hard to sort of move forward on addressing her concern. So she would go in and ask lots of questions as a way to sort of get at that and work through some of those conflicts. They really advised parents not to be afraid to be an advocate. They said that that is your role. That's part of what you have to do, even at times when it feels uncomfortable, that's important. Several parents said, don't be afraid to exercise your legal rights within the process. Going to due process doesn't always have to be this really combative and negative experience with schools. It's just saying, like, okay, thank you very much. You're not going to provide this service, but I think it's really important. Let's go through the process then. Let's see if we can work through the mediation, or if ultimately we have to go through the process to bring other people around to help us navigate through this. And so not being afraid of that. And then another thing that was really heavily emphasized was the idea of having skin in the game. Parents who had really positive collaborative experiences said that they also felt like they were giving back to the school, that they were taking time to acknowledge, to really participate, to share information, that they felt like they also brought something in to share with the team members, and having that identity helped them build stronger relationships and made them feel like they weren't just showing up asking for certain services in IEP, that there were other ways that they were contributing to help them be more of a team player. Flexibility was also a piece of advice that they had, that knowing that oftentimes the professionals that you're working with have really big jobs and are really well-intentioned, and sometimes balls can get dropped. So helping to be problem solvers and being flexible around acknowledging that, they felt helped them establish better collaboration with schools. And then giving back, I'll share a quote with you in a second about that. The idea that you have so much knowledge raising children with disabilities to share, that if there's ways that you can, share your experiences with other parents, or go to meetings to talk about how to make the process better, are there ways that you can sort of contribute to improving the system, knowing that the system does have problems and that we need to all be part of the solution. So Lindsay said, reach out to any connections you have who are in educational organizations like the ones that were offered to us to help represent families or help with the navigation process, because I really wish I had known about it earlier. I wish we had known about that when he was in kindergarten. By the time we heard about it, we were already kind of down our path anyways. We didn't really need it as much, but I think you need help. If you don't have expertise in education, you're so on your own and no one's going to help you. So that's what I still can't get over. So that was her experience with things not being transparent. So she's saying, if you suspect that you're going to have to navigate special ed processes, really try to get information and get support early on. And this was Kelly talking about the questions. Approach your child's needs by asking lots of questions. I don't think professionals tend to respond well to being told what to do or how to do it, but it also isn't helpful to just not say anything. And I found that if I ask enough questions, then it will usually lead. And then she said, well, this wasn't true in one of the schools, but it usually would lead to the right outcome if I ask enough questions about what's happening and how it's affecting my child, or how it's affecting the class or the teacher. So not being afraid to use your voice in those meetings and ask questions when you need clarity. And Lulu was really strongly believing that it's okay for you to have a differing opinion from the school, and it's also okay for you to make decisions and come in and let the school know that you've made those decisions, even if it's different than what the school's advice or decision might be. So she said that piece of parents so often are asking schools the permission to do what they know is best for their kids, and I think that piece of having confidence when you've made a decision and having the confidence to come in and say, this is the decision I've made. Let's work on a way to work with the rest of everything around it. The bottom line is that it's your kid and you can do whatever you want. That was her perspective. And then Jane, be confident in what you have to offer to the process, no matter what. Don't let anything sway you from feeling confident about that. And this is the due process piece, will. And know that if there's something that you really think is going to benefit your child, don't just stop if they tell you no. I mean, there's a process for it. Know about due process and how to access that. And if you think it's something that can really help your child, really fight for it. And Katie was concerned that oftentimes the professionals she was working with had low expectations for her child, and so she said that sometimes she felt defeated and questioned her own sense of what her child's potential was. So she really felt like she wanted to give the advice, I think it's not to buy into their expectations of what your child should achieve. I think that's key, is to have your own expectations of what your child should achieve, what your child should be able to do between you and your child. And if there are special educators and teachers along the way that you can trust, have your child's best interests at heart, then you ask them, what do you think? And Maggie talking about the idea of having skin in the game. I think it's because I'm willing to meet them part way that I'm going back to that. I'm willing to be a partner. I really felt like that gave a positive response back to me, that I'm not expecting you to be a miracle worker and all of a sudden make my daughter's learning disability disappear. And Lena, with schools, I think we all need to be a little flexible. Schools trying to provide a best service also, but sometimes you just have to be flexible with them and understand from their standpoint. At the same time, get the best for your kid. Everyone has to work together. And Bethany, we are the busiest and most stressed people. So I feel like we get called in all the time to talk at the university or help another parent or do whatever. I like doing that, and I get fed in some ways by that. But I'm also have more on my plate than the average person. But I think it helps that we're seen as people contributing and not just always asking for stuff. So I'll scoot through some of this last couple slides and then open this up for questions. General advice for professionals is just that the professionals should be providing you with information and ask them if they're not. That they should be prioritizing the child and being family friendly. And I'll end with this quote from Bethany. So I think for professionals to just think about that family system and how tired we are, how stressed we are, how we have to advocate all the time for every blessed thing. And meanwhile, we're just like you. We're trying to be good parents. We're trying to have a good marriage. We're trying to get 8 hours of sleep. We're trying to put dinner on the table. We're trying to do our paid work or whatever. And we didn't. This is going to sound weird, but we didn't ask for this challenge. And we asked for him to have X, Y, and Z, and we think this is what he needs to learn best. That's not us eating bonbons and saying, woohoo, let's, and she's talking about advocating for, the best services. I wish my child didn't need a computer to speak. So just kind of having that empathy and that compassion for that big picture that we're juggling. Oh, I do have Shiva's quote. I guess I'll squeeze it in if we can because this is really powerful too. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And there's this whole philosophy in nursing. It's called patient-centered goals, but it's client-centered goals, or however you viewed your charge for the day. No child's by the book. You look at every single child as, I'm going to make that child the best he's going to be, and then turn around and say that to every single child you meet. And it's not a tiring goal. It's not something that's meant to make you feel weighted. It's something that's supposed to make you rise to the challenge. So she was really challenging professionals to be inspired. So this might generate some questions. Where do we go from here? It was very clear to me that there needs to be opportunities to collaborate outside the context of the IEP meeting, that there needs to be better teacher preparation about working with families, that parents really need allies through organizations like Vermont Family Network or through their informal networks, and we need to really encourage parents to be seeking allies and people to go to meetings with them, that there's a lot of work being done in schools around Vermont right now around family-school partnerships, and a lot of the focus that I've seen has focused more on like general ed kinds of settings and volunteering in the classroom and help with homework. And I'm wondering if there's a way to leverage the work of the family school partnership teams to create better support systems for parents of children with disabilities in the school, to understand the process more, to be mentors and allies to each other. So that's just a question that I had that could be an area to explore. That we really need to adopt more of a family-centered care approach. Medicine has done a lot of work around family-centered practice, and certainly early childhood special education is more known for having more of a family-centered orientation. Parents express that family-centered approach seemed to go away once their child started kindergarten. So I think there's work to be done in the K-12 system to learn from what's happening in medicine and from early childhood around how to create that ethic within the K-12 system. So that's a very quick overview of what parents were sharing with me. I'd be happy to respond to any thoughts, ideas, or questions. So I have one coming in that says, did parents mention strategies which involve building the advocacy skills of their transition age youth 14 plus? Okay, and so the transition piece was talked about. Several of the parents who had children who were older, they didn't specifically talk about building advocacy within their kids. They were really reflecting more so on their own experiences with high school being a different time, different teams, and the time that's needed to really talk about transition and not feeling like there's enough time within the context of the standard IEP meetings. So we didn't go down the transition road as much as maybe we could have. But I think that this is something that is critically important, because when, number one, there is sort of an underlying idea that transition we're building for independence, and not all families share that value of what that transition is going to look like. And so one of the things that struck me through this process is that we can't wait to be having those conversations about what the parents' priorities are all the way until high school. We need to start having those conversations in elementary and middle school, and we need to embed in the process tools like Coach or Maps that engages families in broader conversations about their child as the whole child, not just those school-based priorities, much younger, so that, and we need to involve the kid in those conversations too, so that when we get to that high school setting, transition is an extension of conversations that have been happening all along the way. And then the next question is, did you see any difference in findings for those parents of children diagnosed with mental illness given the stigma of these diagnoses? I don't think that I saw differences in that. It was more so that sense that I don't think that there actually were differences in terms of their experiences with collaboration. I did hear parents talk a little bit about how their relationship with the school shifted, particularly if they had other children who didn't have disabilities, that their relationship to the school community, the ways that they oftentimes felt marginalized because of their role of now having to be the parent who they needed to advocate strongly for, because their child was maybe more marginalized in the system. But a lot of the comments about collaboration and what worked for collaboration and what didn't work were pretty universal across disability types. The teams for kids with multiple disabilities were much larger. And so that became more of that case management role that parents really acknowledged. So here's another question. Do parents share stories of how other parents helped them or provided support? Lots of parents did, and they felt like that was really critically important. Even if their children had different types of disabilities and if they were in different schools, just learning about strategies they used and how they navigated the system, or just having an empathetic ear, was really sustaining and replenishing. And many parents talked about how, even though they were hesitant at first, once they started also reaching out even beyond like their community, getting involved with advocacy organizations, there's so much support right now online through chat rooms and web-based organizations, and parents have formed a lot of support groups that are internet-based, and they found that to be two things, both helpful at times and also sometimes unhelpful, because they said sometimes there can be a lot of the sad stories, and so they sometimes needed friends to talk to about things that were working just to feel a sense of hope. And then another question, how did parents describe what it means to be an equitable partner? So that really was about feeling like, as the parent, I could bring information to share, and the team would not just dismiss it, that it would get reflected into the IEP if it was in the context of an IEP meeting, or they would then share that information with other team members, that meetings were scheduled at a time that was convenient for me and at a location that worked for me, that they were sensitive to my family's needs. So if I had young children come to the meeting, the fact that they would put out crayons was helpful and showed me that I was a valued member of the team. That it wasn't, the meeting wasn't structured so that all of a sudden my input was the last 5 minutes when they were running out of time, that there were opportunities for me to share my thoughts throughout the structure of the meeting, that that I could go to different team members and voice concerns that I had people not feel defensive about it. So those were some of the things that people define in terms of equity. So I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I know that this is a topic that's all near and dear to everyone's heart, and I hope that we will have a lot more better collaborative relationships between families and schools in the future. And if you want more information from me personally, I'm happy to have the Vermont Family Network share my contact information with you. This webinar will be archived on Vermont Family Network's website along with many other previously recorded webinars. Be sure to visit VFN's website at www.vermontfamilynetwork.org for a complete list of upcoming webinars, workshops, and support groups. Have a great day.